Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, January 7th, and this is the General and Housing Committee. What we're doing today is continuing a set of initial hearings, which are addressing the question of, given our legislative history and all of the legislation that we've passed in recent few years, what is working, what isn't working, why, and directions that we might consider taking. And this morning, we're starting off hearing from the League of Cities and Towns. And I believe we have two of you, right?
Yeah.
Please come up. We have Josh Hanford and Samantha Sheehan.
Here.
We have a forum, we're missing a few people. Part of our problem is that the conditions outside today are such that I decided to delay the hearing slightly, and there are still people who are on the road and will be joining us later. Thank you. Please take it away.
Sure. So for the record, Josh Hanford, Director of Intergovernmental Relations at the Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
And my name is Samantha Sheehan, the Municipal Policy and Advocacy also with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
So thank you for inviting us in early. Glad you're talking about what is working, what could be done to improve housing, and happy that you're starting sort of with the municipal perspective, because ultimately that's where homes are built. So we know you wanted sort of brief. You didn't want us to review the sort of state of housing and the need that we all know exists. So what we're going to do is give you just a very brief overview of what our legislative priorities are this session, voted on by our members and our board, specifically the housing ones. We're going to talk a little bit about short-term rentals. I know we had that discussion last year. We're going to talk about Act 181 implementation and that's impact. Not only housing built in municipalities, they're also built on land, and the regulations around that land from a state or local level have a big impact. We're going to talk about our recommendations on how to move forward with Act 181, what's going well, what we support, and just some other ideas for discussion as time allows. So at a very high level, our priorities this year, I don't know, do we have the other bubble? No, it's okay. We had an opening statement above the 2026, but you could see we really have 4 areas of interest: lower property taxes, build housing, promote public safety, and prioritize transportation. Obviously, we're going to focus with you on the building housing piece. You know, really that statement around support the creation of new housing that municipalities need, have envisioned, and have planned for and allowed in local zoning is what we're going to focus on. So under the build housing, we talked about this last year. We do have some authority to regulate short-term rentals, you know, as far as requiring a registration or an inspection program, but we don't have the broad authority to raise revenue, to have a tax beyond the 1% local option tax, which goes to all rooms. And many municipalities have recognized that short-term rentals are both vital for their community's economy and also impacting the housing market in their community. And with the authority to raise revenue from short-term rentals, it can individualize a municipality's approach to mitigating those impacts by putting that money towards investments in affordable housing or infrastructure that could build more housing, or even you know, beautifying the main street with flowers and events that short-term rental operators would appreciate their properties being located in such a vibrant town. So it's sort of an all sort of across the board effort with the revenue generated from short-term rentals that often local residents feel that if they're going to impose the existing 1% option taxes, it affects their residents the most. And what they're really interested in is gaining some revenue from those that are visiting, that have the luxury to visit, have the wealth, And we currently can't do that with authorization. You'll recall that the state just a year or two ago put a 3% surcharge on short-term rentals across the board. That revenue all goes to the state education fund. So municipalities don't receive any of that. So we have more details on that later. We talked about this also last year, and it's been a long held ask from municipalities and VLCT that we should have property tax stabilization authority, not just the municipal tax. We know that in many municipalities, that's only 20 to 30% of the property tax bill. We need statewide. We are open to any parameters to put on this to, mitigate the impacts to the budget and the ed fund, cap a community size. We're open for any discussions, but the reality is, 75% of municipalities are under 2,500 people in the state. TIF or even CHIP might not work for every small housing project, but if you can plan your project with tax stabilization for 10 years, you can leverage that and you can, invest, get more capital into a project and know what your costs are going to be and come out on top. And a lot of small developers really could benefit.
Go ahead.
Thank you. You just said 10 years. Obviously, if something like this comes to our wall, we'll talk about the different options. But I'm assuming that you've kind of gone through the different options there are. Is like 10 years the sweet spot? Is there a different number you would use?
We've heard the feedback from builders that they think 10 years is like sort of the minimum productive amount of time that would support their financing. And one way we're thinking about this a little bit differently this year is this could and arguably should be built in a way that services sort of sub-chip properties. So properties that are small, so maybe think like duplex conversion, ADU additions, improvements to existing single family homes to multifamily rentals. And also where the municipality does not wish, or it's not appropriate to the project to endeavor a public improvement attached to the development. So there may be a small scale rural infill scale housing project that doesn't need a substantial, expensive public improvement. So the municipality doesn't want to use CHIP. And this type of agreement could really service that project and provide the predictability that the developer needs to move forward.
I should just, to be clear to the committee, Tom Charlton and I have a bill that includes a tax stabilization provision, which they're aware of. And it's somewhat responsive, perhaps not totally responsive to what they're saying.
Is there a year in there?
Is there?
I don't think I've read the bill yet.
It's not, that's because it isn't yet.
Okay.
In the next few days, it'll be, come out, and then it'll be introduced and we can talk about it.
Awesome.
Thank you for doing that.
The next one, I think everyone that has talked to this committee and all the land use committees agree that brownfield cleanup and redevelopment is a good idea, especially if we want to redevelop in our centers. They all have urban soils, they all have contamination. It's been very successful, it's very expensive, and it's very time consuming, and we can't slip. We've had continuing investments and they've worked. So this is one of the few places we say, yes, this is where our priority is to invest appropriations and keep this work going. The next one's about.
Before you go on, do you feel, so you want more money for brownfields? So you support appropriations for brownfields. How about the brownfields process? Do you feel like it needs to change, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, maybe we could come back and say more. There was a brownfield efficiency study that is a result.
We asked for it.
Last year's.
We got it,
yeah.
all 57 pages of it or whatever, yes.
Yeah.
Right, and we read it and not sure that it really does the job.
Yeah, we'd love to bring more ideas about how to
You have
accelerate
ideas,
and
good.
make more efficient the brownfield program. I'll say that, so VLCT, not Josh and I, but our colleagues in the Municipal Operations Support Department, assisted all 251 towns with their ARPA deployment of the municipally allocated ARPA money, and on a number of state ARPA funded programs that engaged municipal government over the last 5 years. And in all of that substantial amount of work done between state and local government, I think the highest rated ARPA investment that we hear about is brownfield. That it seems like that investment of ARPA funds was really productive. And the municipalities had a really positive experience and have really felt the positive impact of those projects for housing.
So it's not as if brownfields are just focused on the larger towns. The smaller town, you're getting
Oh, yeah.
across the
Oh, yeah.
board
Yeah,
support. Okay.
totally.
Yeah. I mean, my old town of Rochester, there's a major brownfield right in the middle of it that has been worked on for years. It could be a great, multi apartment mixed use development,
Yeah.
but brownfields is the problem and it's very expensive.
And those communities already have a sort of market problem with attracting development. And oftentimes these sites are big in the middle of town and they sort of disproportionately weigh down the grand list, right? When they're an undervalued, underutilized property in a small town with a short grand list, it works its way up to the community's priority, top of the priority list pretty quickly.
Just a question for my own query. How encompassing is brownfields when we refer to it as like in your town, like how far gone does it have to be before you're like that qualifies? Because there's definitely a lot of
It's a
properties
great
out
question,
there.
because it's actually,
There's
you
oil
can actually
tanks
think of
dumped everywhere.
brownfields as like the middle. Because there's a level of contamination above and beyond brownfield that requires more substantial remediation. And then there's, it's called the regulation of urban development soils is like this area of policy. And in Vermont, we actually set thresholds differently based on the population density, more or less, of the community. So the soils can be more contaminated in a rural community and or more contaminated in an urban, less in a rural. The way it works is it's sort of burdensome. We have well-established and in many cases, especially around roads, because roads throw this type of contaminant that we regulate. So when we're looking to build, even in a rural community on a transportation corridor, you trigger the regulation of.
So you trigger it sooner in a
You trigger
rural
it
area than a urban
Uh,
area.
It's
Is that what?
on a road, yeah, often.
An unsort of recognized win maybe is in last year. There was an addition that allows A&R to reestablish stump dumps, which are a type of transfer station that could take urban soils and not have to truck it to New York or Pennsylvania, which we do now. It's very expensive. And the irony is you've trucked that soil away, a couple of years later, the new soil is also just as dirty. And so there are practical ways to reduce our costs of urban soils. We have higher standards in most states. So when it's triggered and it's very expensive, and you try to use it on site in the engineering, put it under the parking lot, put it in, but in dense areas, you can't, you have to truck it away and it costs a lot.
Yeah.
And we're trucking it to other states and paying to put it in landfills when it's really, if it's just left in the ground, it's inert, it really doesn't cause any problems. We could have siting of stump dumps in Vermont, and legislation last year sort of asked A&R to do this work, but we haven't really heard anything since, so.
This is a whole, I will add, having read the report, all 57 pages of it this summer, it came in exactly on time, in fact, ahead of time from the date we requested it. And a lot of the report was telling us that it was other people's fault. But I do feel that this is an area worth of attention. The problem is that nothing is going to happen unless it's a lot of attention. It's just a very complicated area.
What do you mean by other people's fault? Is it
Well-
other people's fault or other people's responsibility?
Fault.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I want to try to be politic. That there wasn't a lot of suggestion about what A&R ought to do, and a lot more about what towns ought to do, what developers ought to do, what engineers ought to do. It was pretty much about everybody else. Is that fair?
That
Yeah.
was our read.
Yeah,
So that's, I think, more responsibility than fault, isn't it?
Or responsibility. You're right. Okay, I should use that word. Thank you.
I guess what we propose, and then I'm anxious to move on to
Yeah.
Act 181.
Yeah.
There are innovative and evolving ways to treat the soil so that we're meeting the standard of regulation, which is actually set by VDH. But not digging it up and shipping it out of state, which is where the expense comes
Hmm.
when you're trying to build a housing unit. So I guess hopefully that's what we would like to talk about. Short of that, the feedback we receive from members is that the existing brownfield redevelopment program may be slow. I think the report says 3 years is sort of the average deployment of funds for construction. But even with that, it is a well-loved, utilized, high priority program for our members of all sizes.
Great, thank you.
So we're gonna skip all the Act 181 discussion, 4, 5, 6, because we have a couple slides on that. The last one is maybe new about agriculture. Right at the end of the session last year, there was a Supreme Court case
Right.
that determined in May that the long-held belief that municipalities had no authority to regulate agriculture as a business or any other land use was struck down by the Vermont Supreme Court, and really said in summary, it's just about the water quality regulations, that the Agency of Agriculture is the authority to regulate, and towns shouldn't regulate that. But like any other land use, like any other business, think right away, think setbacks, think safety
Parking.
issues, parking. No, municipalities have the right to regulate, have land use regulations. And so a series of sort of like panic happened, I think, among the agriculture community and the Agency of Ag. And we've met with the Agency of Ag in a very collaborative way over the entire summer and fall. Because this then opened, a traditional policy of VLCT is municipalities should have the right for land use regulations if they've adopted planning and zoning in their town. Not every town has planning and zoning, there's 90 that don't. So in those towns that have gone through a long, lengthy public process, required, they have the right to regulate land use. But the very real reality is most towns don't want to regulate agriculture. And most of the land, they don't want to regulate it. In the very dense areas of our designated downtowns, our tier 1 areas that we're going through this process to say, that's where you're going to put housing. Here's your housing goals. Here's where your growth is going to be. We've had 4 years of legislation preempting local zoning in those areas. Act 250 is exempted. We have to have all types of land use on the equal footing in those areas to achieve those goals. So we've essentially adopted a policy of the LCT, which sort of goes against the tradition that says, no, in 98% of Vermont towns land, we don't want to regulate agriculture. Agency of Ag can, but in these very dense areas where we have requirements and housing targets and goals, 5 units per half an acre, whatever it
Is
is.
it the tier
Water and
1?
sewer.
Yes, water and sewer, we need this authority, otherwise those other things don't.
So you're saying in tier 1, yes, regulate, but outside of tier 1, exempt it.
Yeah.
Well, yes, and what we actually say is where there is Act 250 exemption,
Okay,
not in the FLU, which we'll get to very
Yeah.
shortly.
So it's a
But-
very small.
So this is after municipality has gone through quite literally 3 to 10 years, right, of public process to establish the ability to achieve Act 250
Right, yeah.
exemption.
And it doesn't mean it's
Just
automatic.
there. Right.
This has been since May 30th. We're not aware of one town that started to regulate agriculture. So they would have to choose to go on this path only if you have planning and, you have, so 90 towns can't even do this. The others could if they want to. And it doesn't mean they would stop farming, they would, or anything like that, but they could say, hey, on this setback or this corner, egress needs to be the same as the auto dealership next door. First of all, we don't think there's many farms in areas that have water and sewer with Act 250 exemption. There may be some very small farms, and the Agency of Agriculture is actually making a proposal as well that comes at this from a different direction. It talks about farms under 4 acres, 1 to 4 acres with livestock, that they should be regulated by municipalities. So there's some agreement that in very small farms in very dense areas, there has to be some regulation. And if you think where this came from, the Essex duck farmer in a neighborhood on a third of an acre lot is where this went to the Supreme Court. And those are the exact places where competing interests and uses of your land have to be treated fairly. Because what if a farmer was planning to, grow and have crops with greenhouses, and then your neighbors put up 5-story apartments all around and block the sun? Like, people on both sides of this issue have to understand what the rules are, what the building code, so this is what this is for. As no attempt whatsoever for municipalities to want to take over regulating farming in any way, shape, or form.
Actually,
Thank you. So I follow this case very closely in Franklin County, and pretty much not just my district, but the entire county is farmers, and I come from a long line of dairy farmers. So regardless of what a municipality wants, and if they have the ability, I know all of my farmers are very concerned about this. Would your recommendation be make this change in this committee? Or are you planning to go speak to agriculture this year?
Yeah, I
Or
think
a
this
little
is
bit of
the-
both.
I think this is in the Ag Committee.
We're going to ag next week, but the reality is this is a land use regulation.
Yeah,
and
this is
an
a,
agriculture issue.
yeah, this is squarely in,
Environment.
the authority of a municipality to zone.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but my impression is Ag is gonna hold hearings on this.
yeah, we're going next.
Are you guys?
We actually
anybody
wanted to
draft a
right
draft? Do you have legislation?
We do not, we have a policy statement.
No, but is anybody introducing legislation? To your knowledge?
To my there was a rather quick attempt last year during the special session in June to sort of revert back to the common understanding by changing the legislation, but I haven't seen any bills introduced.
We have worked up.
Could you send the policy statement to me?
Absolutely.
I'd appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, I just want to check on time, so.
Yeah. I would. Well, I'm always yeah, we've got one more witness and we have until 10:30.
Okay,
And so I would say try to be within 15 minutes.
okay, perfect, great. I thought we had like 4 and I was like, my heart was starting to race. Great, all right. So we've been here before and talked about the regulation of short-term rentals. What I wanted to bring to you today is this graphic from a City of Burlington housing report in 2024. So many municipalities currently regulate short-term rentals in different ways. And all municipalities have the authority to do so through ordinance. And they all have the authority to set fees under that ordinance, although the fees cannot generate revenue. It's the simplest way to put it. So the fee can basically cover the cost of the permit and the registry as those expenses acquire incidentally, but they cannot generate revenue above and beyond that. So many municipalities do. I actually was looking at some ordinance last night. Winooski has a relatively low cost to permit a short-term rental if it is an owner-occupied short-term rental. And then for a non-owner occupied short-term rental, it's $1,400. So they have this, so a way that they implement policy to address their local needs related to short-term rental is in the cost of the fee. Other municipalities regulate it in a way where they simply require a fire and safety inspection. Others require a registration, an application, an emergency contact, and a wastewater permit on file. in a lot of our communities that don't have public municipal water and sewer, a primary concern of the short-term rental market is making sure that the number of bedrooms listed on the Airbnb or VRBO listing matches the existing DEC permitted septic tank.
Elizabeth?
Right.
Thanks. So I'm just to be absolutely clear, because I'm ignorant on this subject. I just received an email from a constituent last night about this, just for full disclosure. It is, so short-term rentals are really only regulated locally? Because I have a constituent who asked about owner-occupied short-term rentals.
Well, there's a state registry and a 3% state excise, which Josh referenced, which goes to the education fund.
Yeah.
But in terms of things like requiring an inspection, or a permit, that level of,
There actually isn't a statewide
not?
registry.
okay.
That's local.
Right, that's
Yeah.
local. There is a statewide process for dealing with complaints on housing safety issues. It's typically meant for long-term rentals, but there's nothing that would prevent someone renting a property, finding a safety issue, calling fire and safety for an inspection to do that. It's just their numbers of those responses is very, very teeny. What I've heard, because, you know, they're short-term rentals, people are gone. Often the reviews and the complaints will sort of fix that problem. If people say this place is unsafe and too cold, you know, they won't get more customers. But technically they are able to make complaints through that. That was a compromise a couple of years ago, a bill to have a process statewide and not rely only on that local health officer to deal with life safety threats in rental properties.
So in summary, municipalities have the authority to regulate short-term rentals as they do long-term rentals. An increasing number of municipalities have adopted these ordinances and are enforcing them. What they don't have is the ability to, or the authority rather, to set revenue to pay for that, or to address the other local impacts of having a vibrant, successful short-term rental economy in their town. So there's one far outlier here, which is the city of Burlington.
Right.
So the city of Burlington has a unique charter established excise tax authority. They also have, for example, a separate excise tax on hotels, not lodging, just hotels.
Right.
They have a 9%, I believe, excise tax on short-term rentals that took effect in 2023. The revenue generated from that 9% local tax covers the cost of enforcement through their permitting and inspection department. And it generates an additional more than $500,000 per year, which they put into their housing trust fund, affordable housing trust fund. That trust fund has existed for, I think, more than 30 years. I actually think Mayor Sanders, Bernie Sanders, established it back in the 80s. And so here you can see in this provided chart, it shows the revenue to that housing trust fund over time. So they have a municipal tax rate that raises revenue from property taxes. That's the dark blue. They also have an inclusionary zoning ordinance, which has a fee attached if the developer doesn't build an affordable unit, they can pay into the housing trust fund. So that's the green revenue. So you can see that goes up and down. So that depends on the rate of construction locally. For a period of time, the city chose to actually use money from their unassigned fund balance and sort of lift the housing trust fund up. But that was not a long-term dedicated revenue. And then you see when this short-term rental ordinance takes effect and begins to be enforced in 2023, the revenues for this affordable housing trust fund rapidly exceed $1 million per year. So at the time this report was published, they were estimating $685,000 just from the short-term rental excise tax for Burlington. You may be thinking that's Burlington, but in fact, Burlington currently has registered less short-term rentals than Stowe, for example.
Then,
So-
let's go. Right.
Yes, so there are communities across Vermont that have a larger, more robust short-term rental economy in their municipality than Burlington, while Burlington is the unique municipality that can assess fees and raise revenues that support their local housing goals. So that's what we're asking for. We talked about it last year. We'd love to talk more about it this session.
So what you're saying is there's a limitation on fees, either is it a statutory or are you talking about the constitutional nexus requirement?
I don't know.
Okay,
Generally, thank you. Yeah,
It's maybe both.
yeah.
okay.
Well established that any
Right, yeah.
fees that municipalities put forward have to be
Okay.
justified. They
Yeah.
don't
By
cover funds,
the
they're not-
cost, right,
Yeah.
There
okay,
is a fee setting authority in Title 24.
right, in Title 24, okay.
Yeah.
And, but you're saying in addition, you'd like the ability to, like Burlington, levy a tax, maybe the state would levy the tax, but you'd get this, the town would get it, but it would be a local option.
Yeah.
Right,
I
Yeah.
think what we had talked about last year was adding another 1% option tax, but just for short-term rentals.
yeah,
So you didn't have to, if you had a large lodging establishment with your major employer in town, you could choose, oh, I'm gonna apply it to both, or just short-term rentals, and that doesn't exist at this point.
Yeah. So now we're gonna dive into Act 181. And we have followed closely the implementation of Act 181. I want to say first that the new Land Use Review Board has clearly been working diligently to meet the various reports, stakeholders, groups, rulemaking and mapping deadlines that were created in Act 181. Josh and I have each served on some of those legislatively created working groups, and so have other VLCT members throughout the last 6 months. And overall, that process is going very well. That said, we see with where we are now in the mapping for both the draft tier 3 rule and the draft regional maps.
let me just interrupt, I just want to clarify. When you're saying it's going well, you're referring to the tier 1 process?
The LURB directed processes, which are like,
Oh, all of them, including tier 3, the road rule, tier 2, or are you feeling,
Meaning that they are meeting their obligation.
yeah,
They're doing hard work, trying to engage the public, trying to keep everyone informed. They're following what they were told to do.
okay,
in the
I think
law.
we have some disagreements on how it's going.
all right, okay.
What the result of that work product is, and particularly there's a few conceptual issues that we argue did not meet the intent of Act 181 and did not support state or local housing goals, or were fearful that the end result could impact our ability to meet those targets. And so that's what we'd like to talk about. So in tier 1, so to establish tier 1, you map that area through the regional planning maps. Only 3 regions have a draft map that is before the LURB now that are available for us to look at and analyze. It's
Rutland,
Rutland, Chittenden, and
Northwest.
Northwest. And the other counties or RPC areas are in different stages of having a draft map developed, and they're on a schedule to come in line behind those. From the information available now through the regional planning process, the current estimate for future tier 1A areas, so this would be areas totally exempt from Act 250, is likely going to be less than 12 municipalities total that are prepared in this initial process to achieve Act 250 exemption. That's not 1B. We're still getting a grasp on 1B. And the total eligible area for 1A or 1B is currently estimated below 3%, 2 to 2.5% of total land area of the state. that varies widely by county. So you have Chittenden County with most, or the highest percentage of future eligible exempt area. And then you have the NEK with the lowest percentage of future eligible area. So in some regions, the likelihood of any Act 250 exemption at all in the future is very low. And I'll pause here to say one of our recommended actions is to remove a requirement from Act 181. Again, it's a requirement of municipalities to enforce old Act 250 permits in Tier 1A. This is the sort of number one across the state reason that we hear from members that they're either not interested in 1A or they're creating a 1A area smaller than what they would be eligible for because of particular complex existing developments that have Act 250 permits with conditions that the municipality does not feel it can meet the enforcement requirement of.
And sort of the odd part is, in order to get approved for Tier 1A, you're proving that you have local land use regulations that are meet or exceed Act 250 requirements. And in fact, they might be better. And so you're being asked to enforce two sets of rules. Your new parking that maybe requires less parking, but an old Act 250 permit that requires more parking.
So that
municipalities are just
I
not
think that should stay with the LURB or
The
with the
state-
regional
state,
commission.
yeah.
Yeah, it's their state's permit, it's their permit
State's
condition.
permit, the municipality never authorized, reviewed those things, decided those were the important interests. And so that's a number one recommendation that we have in the Tier 1A.
That we think
perform.
would help the Tier 1A areas be bigger and more communities feel they can take on a Tier 1A process.
And hypothetically more consistent, right?
Absolutely.
And it's, in service of the intent of Act 181, which acknowledges in these areas where the municipal infrastructure can support density and growth and where the local regulatory standards are high, that the Act 250 is not providing a value anymore.
Let me interrupt for just a minute. Miriam, have we heard from Joan? Do we know when she's showing up?
Should be here in 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, all right. Go ahead, Tom.
Would it resolve the same issue if the existing projects covered under Act 250 were from some point forward understood to be regulated by the municipality? In other words, if you have a project that came under Act 250, it was built, and they want to add to a building, it would still stay under Act 250. They would have to have an Act 250 permit.
It would be
But-
both.
It would be both. Okay, well, what if it was, if we made this a similar change and said any future development on that previously Act 250 regulated parcel now has to meet the municipality's criteria only. If they're enforcing one set,
So from the
Doesn't matter which
municipality's
one it is.
perspective, that existing structure almost definitely has a comprehensive zoning permit issued by the municipality
Okay.
and would, in any scenario, be subject to a new local process
okay,
for the future development or changes to the property. I think for the first half of your question, you'd have to ask more of an Act 250 specialist. I don't know how permit conditions live or don't live and are typically managed or enforced. And so I don't know if I could answer in a sort of useful
you're
way.
in good company.
Yeah. But I want to talk about the draft maps, because so remember we have we have 3 draft regional maps that create these FLUs, these future areas that could be exempt from Act 250 or not. And then we also have the draft Tier 3 map and a road rule model. I chose an example. I'm not picking on Pittsburgh. I'm not speculating about the future density goals or housing trajectory of Pittsburgh. I chose Pittsburgh because it's awesome. You should visit. That's a real picture from the town website. It's one of the most beautiful drives in the state, I think, you must have done it. And it has a lot of the characteristics that we think of as supporting housing growth in the future and making Pittsburgh able to leverage the opportunity of Act 181, right? So they have municipal staff, including they have comprehensive planning and zoning and permanent bylaw. They have an existing designated village. And they have a future eligible tier 1 area. They're a mid-sized town by Vermont standards with over 3,000 people. And it's a large community, it's 44 square miles. And their map is available online, so I could show it to you. So this is a capture from the Rutland Regional Planning Commission's future land use map that is currently before the LURB for approval. And where you see the red asterisks, those are the colors on the map that could be eligible for Act 250 exemption in the future if Pittsburgh chose to go for tier 1A, which again, they have permanent zoning and they have water and sewer, although there are additional statutory requirements to meet the tier 1A standard. So if I move the mouse, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the general area that could in the future be Act 250 exempt, where you have the existing village center is the darkest color in the middle. The planned growth area is around that, and then the total village area is the light pink. And then also this orange is marked as infill, transition or infill. So that's an existing residential area where the town and the Regional Planning Commission agree there could be a higher density of housing in the future. And then this violet color, grayish violet color is their enterprise area. So here we have the same land area from the tier 3 map. I acknowledge this is in process, they're on draft 2. We're expecting a draft 3 later this session. But currently in the draft or tier 3 rule, we're looking at mapped resources that would trigger new tier 3 jurisdiction and require the Act 250 review or an Act 250 permit. So the yellow, I've heard some people call this a fried egg, like these yellow fried eggs. That is something called a habitat connector. And that becomes mapped when you have forested area tree canopy on both sides of a road. And it's within a high priority connectivity block per Vermont conservation design. The green splotches are headwater. That's basically synonymous with like very steep slopes that generate runoff that serve as headwaters. The red hash mark is sort of a placeholder. The LURB is calling this an exclusion area, but the idea is this is where tier 1 could be, which would not be subject to tier 3 jurisdiction. And then Pittsford also does have some of these significant natural communities. There's one up here, and then there's actually one over here. So these are rare plant or animal species that A&R knows about, and these are mapped and would trigger Act 250 review. Look at this right now. This is Sugar Hollow Road. We're going to zoom in on that in a minute. So this is a town road in the northeast corner of Pittsford. Now this models the road rule. So the road rule will take effect this summer per Act 181. The LURB has expressed that they plan to write guidance for the road rule, but the road rule is already statutorily created through Act 181. And it would require an Act 250 review for construction, any construction more than 800 feet away from an existing road. So this isn't exactly the area of Pittsburgh that would be triggered, but it's pretty close because this is just showing you a buffer 800 feet off of existing mapped roads. So anywhere that's like a gray splotch would have to get an Act 250 permit.
It hasn't been determined yet whether 800 feet is 800 lineal feet of measured from the road to the site, or is it 800 feet of roadway, which if there's any slope could that could wind up
Yeah,
being a
or
lot
the-
closer to the existing road, so.
Right.
The 800-foot buffer is, that's showing the maximum amount
That
of.
of linear
of- of
distance.
A linear distance from the road. But if you have a slope and you have a 900-foot driveway, you still might only be 300 feet from the road and that would possibly fall under the road rule as well. So they haven't
Yes.
sorted that out yet.
And switchbacks or sort of a neighborhood grid design could trigger this. These are all questions that planning and zoning officials have raised. And hopefully there would be clarity in the guidance provided by the LURB before the rule takes effect. But you have identified a major area of concern for us, which is how is the road rule implemented actually at the local level? Because you need to our local planning officials need to know the answers to those questions. Like, what if it is technically, just as you described, I won't repeat it, but.
Just to let you know, what we're gonna do is we're expecting Joan. Joan is in-house commerce. We hope she'll be here around 10:10. So what I think we'll do is we'll go till 10. So you have another 9 minutes,
Awesome.
okay?
Thanks,
To
Don.
get to your point, whatever it is.
Yep.
And then we'll take a
Yeah.
break.
Okay,
And then we'll proceed to Joan and Maura as just go directly.
okay, we're on the cusp of the big point.
Okay.
It's on the next slide. Is everyone sort of tracking right now? So we have the regional maps that are done with the municipalities and the RPCs that say this is rural general, this is conserved land, this is appropriate for future growth, could be Act 250 exempt. Then we have the tier 3 map created by the LURB,
Right.
which is in a draft form, which maps resources that includes these habitat connectors, steep slopes, headwaters, precious natural resources and natural communities, actually is what the law says.
And then we have the road rule.
And the road rule exists
Right.
in law.
Okay.
July 1 goes into
July 1.
effect.
So here's what we see happening that we think is really not servicing Act 181. And may be a real barrier to our housing goals. So the habitat connectors only happen where there's a road that goes between forests. So the road rule applies Act 250, creates new Act 250 jurisdiction inside of the forest block and seeks to encourage growth along existing roads and areas of development and where there are existing structures. Then in between the forest blocks, you trigger tier 3 through the habitat connector. And in the draft map, this includes a significant amount of state highway and class 2 town roads, including places where the state highway is Main Street.
So you essentially have one incentive saying, hey, don't build into the forest far away from the road. You know, we don't want long driveways, keep people in dense areas where we have infrastructure, we have roads that'll save the forest. And then you have the new tier 3 conditions that say, well, along the road, if it's got trees, you can't build there either. So there's a weird
Well, you can
incentive.
with an Act 250 permit.
You can with an Act 250 permit.
Yeah.
More than 200 square feet is going to be the new condition. And so you really can't build anywhere without an Act 250 permit. And this road, you know, there's other roads, there's houses that exist there. This isn't wilderness, is our point. And so if you look at this on a grand scale of Vermont, and if we've acknowledged that only 2-3% of the entire state's going to be in a tier 1 area, are we able to meet our housing goals and build what we want? We don't think so. We think there's a lot of towns that are going to be stuck with 10 parcels in their village center on Main Street that are the only ones that are going to benefit from Act 181. And we may in fact be in a place where the existing Act 250 temporary exemptions we have now is bigger than what we end up with Act 181 full implementation. So therefore, our recommendations you'll see are where we sort of get to how we think this should be addressed this session.
If I could just also address what is development, because this is sort of the
Yes.
last final trigger. So these are the new areas where Act 250 jurisdiction would be applied for the road rule or for tier 3. But then I admit it took me a long time to understand this, and I've followed it very closely for 3 years. Act 181 says the LURB will define development. The current draft rule says that development includes all of these things. So improvements to existing structures, so improvements to homes, as long as the construction, if the total area of construction is over 200 square feet. So if you're building a garage over 200 square feet where there's an existing home, an ADU over 200 square feet where there's an existing home, you would be triggered in this jurisdictional area and need an Act 250 permit. New wastewater treatment, so septics and wells. Although they exempt improvements or repairs to existing septics and wells in the draft rule. The construction of new homes and structures, commercial, mixed use, residential, including single family homes. And I want to point out, this is not sort of Act 250 as usual, where it was the 5-5-10 rule, so 5 units within.
No, 10 units within 5 years, within 5 miles.
Yep, so this is, you could do 1 unit. In 10 years' time, but if you're in this jurisdictional area, still need an Act 250 permit. Roads, driveways, and utilities, unless it's 50 feet off of an existing transportation facility, road or driveway, sidewalk. And then trails, so that includes municipal trails, state trails, and trails. The majority of our public trail network in Vermont are awesome. Really successful public trail network in Vermont is actually on private land. So trails more than 100 feet. So that is the type of development that would require an Act 250 permit in these areas that I showed you on the map. So I'll pause there.
Oh, I think what we really want to do is you to get to your recommendation.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. So our number 1 recommendation is to extend the current exemptions. Our next slide is things we've done over the last few years together that have worked really well. The existing exemptions have to be at the top of the list. We know they're producing housing, and we know they're producing housing in the places where we agree it should be built, which is in the dense areas of our communities and historic settlement areas. The second thing is just to delay implementation of the road rule and tier 3 so that local communities, the public, property owners, and the state regulators, the LURB, can better understand the impacts of the new jurisdictional area, ensure equity, town to town, region to region, and that and sort of sort out the nitty gritty of how to actually administer permits both locally and for Act 250, such as the 800-foot linear question. And then lastly, we already covered this, to eliminate the requirement to enforce Act 250 exemption in Tier 1A, which we think will help there be just more Tier 1A.
Is there any bill doing this?
I don't think it's been introduced or has a bill number, but there is a rural caucus bill that covers most of these. I think the exemption extension, I think the extensions in that bill are shorter than what we're saying of 2028 and 2030. But it does address a number of our concerns. Yeah.
And then, so what is working well? We're gonna be really quick on this. We just said it, the Act 250 temporary exemptions. I believe this is Peter Kahn in
Yep.
Virgins. He talked to me when I was housing commissioner about his goals in that area. But he said, every time I trigger Act 250, I want to build less houses and it costs me too much. As soon as it was exempt, he put this project up. It took it, it was like immediate, and he's doing that in these smart growth areas.
He went from 9 to 24.
Yeah,
So 9 units under the old 10 unit
Yeah.
5-5-10 trigger to 24 under the
yeah.
new.
He was
exemption.
literally building 9-unit neighborhoods to avoid Act 250 for decades. And then as soon as it was exempt, he built more. It was better for everyone. Municipal planning grants, we talked about the goals to get your zoning and ready. Those municipal planning grants help very small communities in particular pay for that and make sure that happens. VHIP, we hear from communities, they see units coming online from VHIP. That is a smart, small dollar investment. I think one new element that could further take VHIP into the next decade and decades is allow it to be also used for preservation, affordable housing preservation. You know, right now it's got the 10-year, you know, that can expire. Maybe it's a different dollar amount, but have the program make that an eligible use to continue these affordable investments. It's going to cost less. When we do perpetual affordable housing in the traditional sense, that perpetual affordability only comes with ongoing investments. They invest in it every 20 years because things wear down, things break. In order to fix it and keep people housed at an affordable rate, they're gonna have to borrow money or raise the rents.
And safe energy efficient
Yeah.
units, which is the other thing VHIP does that people love.
Brownfields, we talked about that. Obviously, the TIF districts are where we're seeing a lot of housing, and then CHIP is brand new. We have a lot of guidance coming out. That needs to be reinforced and
So we're gonna
supported.
talk about that Friday.
Yeah, are you appearing Friday?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Well, let's keep our questions short because we're gonna take a break for our next one, but go ahead, please.
Are the recommendations that you're making, so are you representing your members right now, or are you representing VLCT? Like, when you make the recommendations, are they based on surveys, or what are they based on?
Our members is the LCT, and they adopted these policies, these priorities.
Okay, and when you do you survey your members?
Yes,
We do.
every year.
And so these are based on surveys?
The nuance here of each of these isn't based on a survey, but they're based on a very large policy setting process that has committees and then a full member vote, and then the board that you know, votes on the higher level priorities, which happened in October.
And do you have a weighted membership? Like, do you allow for more members from bigger towns, or is it one member per town, or what's
So
how is your?
Every municipality in Vermont is a member of VLCT.
Yeah.
Including villages.
So every
And-
municipality has one member?
No, every municipality is a member. They pay a membership fee. They have access to all the services that VLCT provides. And we represent each of those municipalities. Every municipal official, whether they're an employee, elected or appointed,
Volunteer.
it
They're all
volunteer,
members.
paid staff, mayors, select board members, member of legislative body, volunteer, citizen commission members, planning commission, housing commission, zoning administrators. If you have a title, as a municipal official, you are a member of VLCT. So we have over 8,000.
When it comes to the
members.
voting that we vote on our municipal policies every 2 years,
Mhm.
and so these exist within those policies. Each municipality designates a assigned voting member at an annual meeting.
That's what I'm trying to get at. Thank you.
And our policies were unanimously voted on by all present and voting members last year.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Hey, thank you so much. This has
Thank
been a
you.
really interesting hour, essentially.
Thank you for thank you for the extra time.
No, thank you for answering questions.
I-
We're
I
gonna
was
take a
gonna-
break. Please come back here before 10:15.
Okay, and then we have
Joan Goldstein,
Joan,
and
and then.
we'll go right into Laura when she gets here at 10:30.